That fall evening, Emily stayed up late in the kitchen. Looking through family photos over and over again, she couldn't hold back her tears. Almost all of the pictures had her captured with her husband, Jacob. In one photo, the young people were hugging at the movies, and in another, they were already resting by the river. Jacob and Emily met during their senior year of the university and were immediately attracted to each other. It was that kind of fateful meeting that only happens once in a lifetime. And none of their friends had any doubt that the two would soon become an official couple. Having graduated from university, Jacob and Emily bought a small house on the outskirts of the city and moved in together after holding a small wedding ceremony. Now that there was nothing standing in the way of the young family's happiness, they could enjoy their life together, which was full of tenderness and mutual respect. Jacob, as befits the head of the family, soon got a good job, which allowed the newlyweds to start thinking about having children. First, they had a son and named him Ethan. Then, 2 years later, they had a daughter, Molly. Since Jacob spent most of his time at work, the responsibility of raising the children fell entirely on Emily's shoulders. However, despite always being busy with housework, the young mother didn't lose heart and considered herself a happy person. Meanwhile, Jacob's career was taking off, and thus the family's income was growing steadily. Over time, they moved to a better house and even bought a new car. It seemed that the life of the young family was planned for years to come, and only success and prosperity seemed to be waiting for Jacob and Emily in the near future. Unfortunately, their happiness was short-lived. And now, sorting through the family photos in the kitchen, Emily couldn't help but think back to that fateful day yet again. That morning, Jacob had breakfast with his family, just as he always did, and after kissing his wife and children goodbye, he went to work. At lunchtime, he called Emily from his work phone and warned her that he had to stay late at work. The fact was that Jacob's company was going through some changes in management, and so he had to adapt to the new bosses. From some bits of conversations, Emily concluded that the new director of the company was a woman, but she couldn't be sure. Since Emily was always busy with the family and knew that her husband was working hard, she chose not to bother him with unnecessary questions. Having prepared Jacob's favorite dish for dinner, Emily sat about waiting for her husband to come home from work. Glancing at the clock on the wall, the woman tried to pass the time by playing with the kids. Ethan and Molly loved doing puzzles, but this time they couldn't do it without their mother's help. Time passed, but Jacob still hadn't come home. The young businessman didn't answer his phone, and when the woman called the office, she was told that he'd left for a business meeting. Trying to find a logical explanation for what was happening, Emily consoled herself with the fact that her husband's phone could be simply dead and that he would call her or come home any minute. Unfortunately, Emily's concern wasn't taken seriously at the police station. There are millions of options where your husband could be. Maybe he lost track of time with some friends at a pub. Or maybe he took his mistress to Miami. Wait a couple of days, and we'll file a missing persons report if he doesn't show up by then, the desk officer said to Emily. But the woman knew that Jacob wouldn't leave her nor his children for some mythical mistress. And when it was perfectly clear that her husband was actually missing, Emily went back to the police station. Unfortunately, an extensive search didn't give any results. Jacob seemed to have vanished into thin air, leaving no trace behind. And 2 weeks later, Emily learned that her husband's car was found in the river. Since the body of the young businessman wasn't found in the car, Emily continued to believe that her husband was alive. Jacob's Chevrolet was discovered by some fishermen whose tackle got caught up on the bumper of the sunken car. Now, the possible cause of the young businessman's death had become clear. Most likely, the man was in a hurry to get to the business meeting and must have lost control of his car. Having crashed through the guardrails, the car ended up in the river. After the car was pulled out, the divers searched the river bottom. However, they didn't really believe that they would actually find Jacob's body. There's a very strong current here, ma'am. The body could have easily been carried hundreds of miles away from the crash site. one of the divers said with a sad sigh. But Emily continued to believe that her husband was alive, even when everyone had already come to terms with Jacob's death. All this time, Ethan and Molly kept asking their mom when their dad would be back home. Hiding her eyes from her own children, Emily made up stories about their father going on a long business trip to one of the European countries. "Wow, will he see Paris and London?" Ethan exclaimed without hiding his admiration. "Of course, honey, and he also promised to send you gifts," Emily answered, barely managing to hold back her tears. She had decided to send her kids gifts on behalf of their missing father. Because, officially, Jacob couldn't be listed as neither dead nor alive. "I'd rather have the kids remember him as he was the last time they saw him," Emily thought with tears in her eyes. 5 years flew by. Taking care of the children took up a lot of time and energy, preventing Emily from sinking into depression and giving up on life. Their cheerful, contagious laughter and outdoor games were like a healing balm for Emily's tormented soul. Even though she now considered herself a widow, she still couldn't let another man into her heart. Subconsciously, the woman continued to believe that one day her husband would turn up and things would go back to normal. All this time, Emily got by earning a living by taking random orders, which she found on an online platform for freelancers. But the older Ethan and Molly got, the more money she needed to provide them with at least the basics. Therefore, going through the job search website yet again, the woman decided to change her line of work. Emily had to carefully go over hundreds of job proposals before she found something truly worthwhile. "They're looking for a maid for a country house. High pay is guaranteed," Emily read deliberately slowly. Rereading the ad over and over again, the woman was getting only more convinced that it was the perfect option for her. "High pay? Well, that's exactly what I need," Emily exclaimed and reached for the phone in order to call the number and the ad. From the first minutes of the conversation, she learned that the owner of the house was a wealthy woman named Charlotte Edwards. After going over all the details, Emily was satisfied with the job conditions and thus gave her consent without hesitating even for a second. The next morning, she was already standing at the gates of an impressive estate, surrounded by a high fence around the entire perimeter. In the very center, there was a 3-story mansion with a red-tiled roof, massive columns, and many balconies built like viewing platforms. Following the guard, the young woman caught herself thinking that she was in a real castle. Finally, the man brought Emily into the office of the owner of the house. "Well, hello, Emily. You look exactly like I imagined you. I think you'll like it here," Charlotte said with a smile and extended her hand to the guest. "Thank you, ma'am. I'm sure you won't regret hiring me," Emily replied. "I'm sure I won't. As you can see, I have a large staff around here, and no one has yet complained about low pay. Unfortunately, my manager is late. Well, never mind. You can meet him later. In the meantime, you can explore the house and get started on your duties," Charlotte said, making it clear that the conversation was over. Hurrying to follow the instructions of her employer, Emily plunged headlong into work. The house was truly large. In addition to Emily, Charlotte Edwards had staff of a cook, gardener, security guard, and personal driver. It was all run by a manager named Michael, whom Emily hadn't met yet. Polishing the windows, the young maid noticed a car drive into the yard. "That's probably the manager," the woman thought and continued with her work. But when a fit young man got out of the car, Emily's hands unclenched and the sponge and the bucket fell to the floor. "Jacob? No, that's impossible," the young maid whispered, disregarding the puddle rapidly spreading under her feet. But when the manager came into the house and saw the puddle of soapy water on the floor, deep wrinkles filled his forehead. "Are you the new maid? My name is Michael Barnes. I'll let the flooded floor slide the first time, but I have to ask you not to let it happen again," the manager said in an icy tone. His words made Emily feel very uncomfortable. The woman didn't know how to respond, so she simply nodded and looked away. Could it really be Michael? But how is that even possible? Oh God, he has that barely noticeable scar above his upper lip, just as Jacob did, flashed through the young maid's mind. Meanwhile, the manager continued to act as if nothing out of the ordinary was happening, as if he really was seeing Emily for the first time in his life. Okay, now is not the time. I'll talk to him later, the woman reasoned, pulling herself together. She spent the rest of the day doing chores around the house. There was a lot of work, and by the evening, the woman was literally falling down from fatigue. All this time, she only thought of Jacob, who pretended not to know her. A couple of times, Emily witnessed Charlotte and her manager kiss, which clearly indicated that there was an affair going on between them. Having finally found an appropriate moment, Emily walked up to Jacob in the backyard and told him everything as it was. She didn't just tell him that they knew each other, but also about their 2 children who were left without a father. Needless to say, this news shocked the young manager. Having finally overcome the initial shock, the man said, "Ma'am, are you sure you couldn't be mistaken? The thing is, I don't remember my past. Something happened to me 5 years ago. I was found on the street with a head injury. Charlotte did everything to make sure I survived. She also helped me get new documents, and now here you are, telling me that my name is Jacob." Looking into the eyes of the young manager, Emily realized that he wasn't lying. Moreover, the huge scar on the back of the man's head proved his words to be true. But Emily didn't wait 5 long years for her husband to return and to give up without a fight and let him go. Taking her old phone out of her pocket, she started showing Jacob photos that were irrefutably proof of their life together. 3 pictures were enough for the young manager. He grabbed his head and sank to his knees with a groan. Images from his past swirled in Jacob's head at frantic speed, lining up in a logical timeline of his former life. I remembered everything. Charlotte, she's not who she claims to be," Jacob whispered, writhing in pain before he lost consciousness. Only now did Emily realize that her husband wasn't to blame for anything. He simply became a victim of a vile deception. Having called the ambulance and the police, the woman watched Charlotte Edwards tear her hair out, unable to do anything. As it turned out later, she was the new director of the company where Jacob had worked. Having laid eyes on the handsome and intelligent employee, Charlotte decided to break his family up and get him to marry her. But no matter how much the businesswoman tried to charm him, being the decent family man that he was, Jacob stubbornly refused to pay any attention to her advances. Having decided to get the young man at all costs, Charlotte Edwards turned to her henchmen and organized an attack on the unfortunate man. Then, the insidious boss brought the wounded Jacob to her house and nursed him back to health, giving him a new name in the meantime. All this time, Charlotte was very happy with how her plan turned out and didn't even think about the fact that the unfortunate man had a wife and 2 children. Now, the woman was facing criminal charges for attempted murder and fraud. Of course, thanks to her expensive lawyers, Charlotte will most likely avoid doing any real time. However, she definitely won't be able to salvage her reputation or her relationship with Jacob. Because building one's happiness on someone else's grief never makes for a strong family, which can only be based on love and mutual respect. Jacob regained consciousness by the evening and was discharged from the hospital the very next day. To Emily's delight, her husband remembered everything, down to the smallest detail. Having returned to the family, to the delight of his wife and children, Jacob is confident that their family will have a happy future together and does everything in his power to make sure of it.